The church is dying. Or is it? While it may seem like we're losing a game of tug of war for the vitality of the church, today we're going to explore one sign of hope for growth in the church's future. Here with me today to explain that is Father John LoCoco, who is the Vocations Director for the Archdiocese of Milwaukee. At a time when churches are closing and merging due to priest shortages, an archdiocese might be ordaining only 2 or 3 priests. But Father LoCoco's archdiocese has been growing in the number of priests they're ordaining. They ordained 6 last May, and they'll ordain 9 priests this coming May. Why are so many young men in this archdiocese inspired to give their lives to the priesthood and to Jesus Christ? What is it about the culture of their seminary that strengthens them and helps them to ordination? And how will this help rejuvenate our church? Father LoCoco, thank you for joining us today. It's a pleasure to meet you in person.
Yeah, it's great to be with you.
Great. I was at your seminary dinner just a couple of weeks ago. I had the privilege of being a guest, and I have never been to a seminary dinner like that before in my life. And listeners, this seminary dinner in the Archdiocese of Milwaukee, for those of you unfamiliar with it, as I was, even though I live next door in Chicago, had 2,000 guests and a waiting list.
Yes.
I have never been to an event with that much enthusiasm and energy for the priesthood. It was really something. How long have you been having this particular event?
The event has been sort of ongoing since Cardinal Dolan's time here as our ordinary. I think in the time that we've had Archbishop Listecki, that's when it's sort of like really continued to make leaps and bounds to kind of become the dinner that it is. We've like moved from venue to venue, and I think 2000 is kind of like what's feasible with the wait staff, what's feasible in terms of registration. And so it is in so many ways. I just feel like the energy in the evening is very jovial. Like we all kind of go to these dinners and we want to support good organizations. I just feel like the dinner is a celebration of like everything Catholic, even though it's about the seminary. It just feels like there's such a good presence in the air. And so, yeah, I'm glad you were able to be there. It's such a fun event.
Oh my goodness. It was joyful, and no one made fun of me for being a Bears fan. So people were very charitable and all of that. So, before we get into talking about the seminary and your role as a vocation director, I'd like to just lay a little bit of groundwork for the discussion. So you're a priest, obviously, a diocesan priest. But one of your sisters recently joined the Handmaidens of the Heart of Jesus up in New Ulm, Minnesota. So that's a really unusual thing nowadays to have a priest and a religious come from the same family and from the same home. So what did your mom and dad do, or did your family do, that emphasized or helped both of you along the path of your discernment process?
Sure. Yeah. I get that question a lot because I'm one of 8. I have 3 older brothers and then 4 sisters named after me. And so all my siblings, praise be to God, in their own way, they're practicing their faith and they're trying to live their Catholic faith. And most of them go to the same parish and are sending their kids to the same school. And so, yeah, people look at like, what'd your parents do? I'm like, trust me, if we knew, we would like publish it.
Yeah, market it. Yeah.
We'd market that as a program. But I think one of the things is you can't give what you don't have. And I think my parents have and continue to sort of maintain a strong and robust faith for themselves. Like growing up, they had a holy hour from 1 to 2 a.m. on Sundays. I would see a Magnificat sitting around the house. I would see my mother go pray the rosary. Like it wasn't performative, not to say that it can be, but I just knew in a deep way, like, okay, my parents have this sort of relationship with the Lord. And it was something that always was an invitation and an imposition. And so I think they helped cultivate an environment in which we could grow into the faith in our own time. And then I think one of the real, if I could look at like what's one element, all 8 of us did a study abroad in Rome. And I don't think that's insignificant.
Interesting.
5 through University of Dallas and 3 of us through University of St. Thomas's Catholic Studies program.
Okay.
And so I think that sense of the universal church and to feel a part of it and to feel sort of invited to continue to walk into it as you're an adult, that really helped, I think, solidify the faith for all of us.
Right. And even though I think a lot of Italy is now sort of secular in the same way a lot of Western Europe is, at every turn, the faith is present. And the people still kind of live the liturgical season, even if they're not doing that for religious reasons, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, and even one of the best nights is Holy Thursday. The altars of repose in the city are open. And you could see ragazzi, like the young, teenage girls and boys running around the city, and they'll go into altars and pray rosaries, and even if they don't go to mass on Sundays. I mean, it's just culturally it's kind of so rich there. Yeah.
Right. And well, there was an article in the New York Times a couple of years ago, and you're probably familiar with this as a vocations director, that talked about one of the greatest obstacles, particularly to the priesthood, is the objection of parents.
Yeah.
And you look like it. In fact, we have a lovely young Dominican at my parish who, in his first homily to us, explained to us that his own father did not go to his ordination. That's how much his parents objected to his vocation. Yeah, they've since reconciled, but that's how adamantly opposed they were. And then I look at, like Sister Claire Crockett. I'm not sure if you're familiar with her. Her mother lay down in the doorstep and said, if you're going to do this, you're going to walk over my body to do it. And she walked right over her mother's body and entered. But that was the level of opposition both this religious sister and this priest faced. How do you approach that with families? Do candidates talk to you about this phenomenon?
Oh yeah, certainly. I think the CARA study notes it annually that's still like a very considerable obstacle. And you'll see candidates who are really dealing with like obstinacy in a very sort of like active sense from their parents, but more often than not, I think what they feel is an isolation, like in determining the Lord's vocation and in making that discernment and taking steps towards it. You feel that isolation because you don't feel that support. And so like support that's been in place for so long. And I would say as a millennial and now dealing with millennial candidates and Gen Z candidates, being part of a generation that had that, helicopter parents and like very involved and very invested. And all of a sudden then it's like a switch that goes off. They're like, oh, I'm thinking about priesthood. It's like no interest, not necessarily like aggressively against it, but it's just like a sort of a drifting away. And so that isolating feeling is very lonely. And I think it's one of the things that candidates have to sort of determine first and foremost is, am I doing this for the Lord? And so it could be tough. Yeah.
Well, and do you think family size has something to do with that as well? Now, you referenced you yourself are from what would be today considered quite a large family. And do you think it's because, if there's one boy and one girl in the family and they want the family name to carry on, or they simply want grandchildren, which is a natural desire that I can understand as a mom myself. Yeah. Do you think family size is also playing something in the particular opposition that some families might have to ordination and to religious life?
Sure. I mean, I think anecdotally, when it's a small family or the only boy, that is the reason. But I also wouldn't say that when there's obstinacy from the parents, it's not only from small families. And so parents love their kids. I mean, at the heart of it is just, this is like, they love their kids. And I think they look at the priesthood today, or they look at religious vocation, and they're like, is this going to be fulfilling? Is this going to make them happy? What happens if they leave 5 years in? What's their plan? There's all of these things. I mean, it's about asking the parents to make this act of faith. And I think what's difficult is the candidate for discernment, they're sitting every day and it's like this small spark they're protecting and they're cultivating it and they're breathing new life into it. And then all of a sudden they say to their parents like, oh, by the way, I'm doing this thing. I called my mother from Rome. I was like, by the way, I'm applying to seminary. Like it's just happening.
And that was just, had been no runway to this.
I mean, I was involved in mission trips and, I was like a campus ministry kind of kid. So it wasn't like so beyond the pale. It's not like I was,
Was your mom surprised though?
Yeah. I mean, I went into that semester in a 2.5-year relationship. I was playing college football, I was pursuing a finance degree. I had an internship lined up. I mean, I was like, a lot was in place. And I came home and I was like, I entered seminary. And so,
wow.
My parents' only protest was just a question, which was like, are you sure you don't want to finish your degree first and then enter? And I said, no, I know I need to do this now. And they're like,
oh, really?
Okay.
So you hadn't finished undergrad?
No, I was halfway through college. I entered as a junior into college seminary at St. Joe's, which is now closed, at Loyola University.
Right. Sure. Of course.
Yeah. So, yeah.
Okay. So you were able to get your degree from Loyola and then while you were in formation there. I see.
Yeah.
Okay, that's interesting. And are there any college seminaries like that anymore in the United States? There might be some for religious orders, I would think.
Like diocesan college seminary program?
Right, yeah.
Oh, yeah, there's plenty, yeah.
Okay.
We send our men to St. Mary's University in Winona.
Okay.
There's a great one up in St. Paul at St. Thomas, St. John Vianney Seminary. There are some still very excellent college seminary programs.
So it's not rare, I guess, that men would enter out of high school. I mean, I know for religious life, most women don't enter until after they've finished college, but with some exceptions. But
right.
So are you seeing men that literally from high school who enter? Or do
Yeah.
they? Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
wow.
Oh, yeah.
What percentage of your seminarians would follow that particular path?
Um, it's not a totally significant. I mean, I think, also if a guy enters as a freshman in college, statistic chances of him like making it all the way to ordination aren't exactly in his favor. So you have like 4 guys or
Right.
5 guys enter, maybe 2 of them will be ordained. And so it's a little bit of a longer investment, but also, yeah, I mean, I think it's kind of 6 one way, half a dozen the other. We have about 9 guys in our college seminary program right now. I'm going up this weekend with 5 high school juniors and seniors who want to do a come and see.
Oh, excellent.
Yeah. So, I mean, I especially when you're 18, it's
Yeah.
like, if you're thinking about it, I just say like, just go, you're going to do general curricular requirements anyway.
Right.
If it's not, we had a guy enter, he did a year. It wasn't for him. He transferred. He's at Benedictine. I was like, great.
Yeah.
Like now,
Right.
and
But
you've
at
given
least
the
you
Lord
look
that
right.
time.
Exactly.
Right.
You gave
Yeah.
God a chance and you gave yourself a chance. And rather than have that nagging at you your entire life.
Yeah.
But it takes courage to do it as a young person. So my hat's
Yes.
off to you and anybody who does. But okay, let's focus on the Archdiocese of Milwaukee. Have you always had this level of vocations? Or what did you make changes at your seminary program or in the work that you do that's seen this increase in numbers that you have?
No, we've not always had these numbers. I mean, and I think, in fact, for a long period of time, there were a lot of dioceses, if we think about just the sending diocese, who felt unsure or uncertain about the quality of formation, and sort of to have 9 seminary dioceses sending now, I think is a great sign of the formation work that's ongoing. I think in terms of like vocation culture, which I could more approximately speak to, I feel very grateful to have sort of inherited this very excellent culture that's been built up by vocation directors of old, and so the most recent one, he spent, he did 9 years almost, or almost 10 years. And that last half of it, he did it as vice rector of our seminary while being vocation director. And so just incredible amount of work. Now he's the rector of our seminary and doing a phenomenal job there. So, people are like, what are you doing? I'm like, well, I'm only 2.5 years into this. I feel like I've inherited a lot. I think one of the things has been a real shift away from parish masses and parish events, and just sort of like, often you just kind of feel like the traveling sort of like circus, like I'm going to go, I'll set up my little booth, my little table, I'll hand up my cards and do these things. I think instead it's about acknowledging the importance of like that relational ministry and that ministry of presence. I'd say the average guy, from when I've been talking to him to when he applies, it's 2 or 3 years. So, I mean, there are guys I've been talking to since they were sophomores in college who are now in real sincere discernment about making that application into sort of seminary post-graduation. And so that's a lot of cups of coffee. And often, it doesn't bear fruit in the sense. And so I always actually communicate to the men, I have no real desire for them to be priests. My desire is for them to be holy and to do the Lord's will.
Right.
And if it's to be a priest, then I'm here to assist in that process. If it's to be a good husband and father, I'm here to assist in that process. And so a lot of the ministry is pastoral ministry, and we try to center it around a few sort of hubs of sort of encounter. One being the seminary itself, hosting events here, inviting them in here, silent retreats, high school camps, middle school camps, sort of come and see weekends, those things there, and letting them feel comfortable at the seminary. And I think one of the things the seminary's cultivated well is that it doesn't feel institutional. It feels like a home. And so letting the men see that's kind of been a huge emphasis for us in recent years.
And do you use social media much when you're reaching out to young men? Has that assisted you in reaching people, or has that been a detriment in some way?
We have our website, thinkpriest.org. That's a helpful place for not only resources, some of the videos we've produced, but also just general inquiry. And that's been sort of a helpful hub. I think it's a real prudential discernment, because you can say to yourself, like, I'm really going to pour myself into this work of social media and social engagement. And that is a place where you can like meet a lot of these people. But it has to then lead to something real, and I think my sister works at Word on Fire, and she does a lot of the digital media coordinating. And I think the thing that she just understands, and they understand his mission so well, is like, okay, here's a catechetical engagement. Here's an apologetic engagement. Here's something that's going to like kind of lift your heart and your mind and your soul. But also we need to then like make you turn towards something to get invested in your parish, to get invested in your religious community. And so I think that's kind of the balance we're looking to do. So yeah, when we have the Instagram, we have the Facebook, I have the website, we do videos, we'll go on podcasts, right? But I think it's about showing up and just being there and just like
Right.
kind of a real spiritual fatherhood to that.
So we know that from the CARA studies and other ways we have of tracking these things, that since 1970, the number of American priests have been dropping, but there was a pretty precipitous drop after 2014. And
Yeah.
for likely very obvious reasons, because of the abuse scandals really probably hitting their nadir at that point. But, I have a friend who was telling me that her little brother asked her once if you had to be bald to be a priest because you'd only ever, interacted with men who were much older.
Jeez.
So he thought that was like a requirement. So,
Yeah.
how the average person listening to this is likely going to be a layperson, probably a married person, maybe with some small kids. How do we, as, just your average day people in the pew Catholics, how do we help foster vocations, and how do we help our parishes to do vocation work as well? What can we do as people who aren't called to religious life to nonetheless foster it among our family and friends and fellow parishioners?
Sure. Yeah, there's a lot of great ways to sort of think about that. First and foremost is like the fruit of our prayer, right? I mean, it's the Lord who calls. It's not us who choose. It's the Lord who's chosen us. And so I think our cooperation with the Lord's work of salvation in this regard, just our own prayer, that's preeminent. And I always sort of say that. In terms of like what we can do in establishing a culture and in sort of participating in the work. And in fact, the program for priestly formation sort of like mentions that, like the discerner who is identified is sort of like formed in his discernment by his parish.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, here's the problem. My generation, and especially the generation under me, they don't go to parishes like you went to parishes,
Right.
It's like that's their parish and that's Mrs. Jones and that's Mr. Whatever. And they're in the same pew and here are the same people. And I'm going at the same mass every time. I mean, even for me, growing up in the 90s, like we went to the 7:30 a.m. Sunday mass because all the kids are up anyway, right? If you weren't there for consecutive weeks, you get a phone call, people being like, "Are you dead?"
Someone would notice if you were
gone.
gone.
Like, where are you? Are you guys sick? Do you need something?
And it wasn't just your spiritual life. It was your social life.
Yeah.
It was often your academic formation. It all was in that little microcosm of your parish.
Yeah.
And even in cities like, Chicago and Milwaukee and Detroit, where you would identify yourself by your parish name, that's all slowly deteriorating.
Sure.
So that sense of identity, your Catholic identity, has to find its roots elsewhere, I would think.
Yes, right. And so there's basically, I think what a parish has to sort of ask themselves. A parish is a gathering of the people of God, right? It's not the brick and the mortar, it's the people who comprise it. And so it's about looking around and asking, like, how much are we seeking to be involved in this work of discernment, this work of vocation? And really it's about saying, like, I think often it's like the events, the resources, the time, the talent, the treasure, it gets kind of ordered towards one audience and maybe not other audiences, right? Or if it happens, there's a real fragmentation. So it's about sort of being like, what is drawing young people, and is our parish doing those things? And it means sometimes asking hard questions, because that means re-examining how we worship, our liturgy, our reverence therein, re-examining the speakers we're bringing in, re-examining the sort of social events that we do. Someone who's 19 is probably not that interested in going to fish fry, but everyone who's in their 50s and 60s loves the fish fry. Doesn't mean we have to stop doing the fish fry, but we kind of ask ourselves, like, what else can we sort of offer that's going to be sort of lower the threshold for engagement? Because the young adults, right, and the people who are really the part of the culture of vocation, they're the ones who are looking for that community. And then when they find it, that's where I, as the director, sort of place myself too. And that's why it wasn't helpful for us to just go like parish to parish to parish preaching vocation masses, because a lot of
they're not there.
We're not there. Yeah, they're not there.
Right. That's very interesting. Well, let's just talk for a little bit about capital V vocations and lowercase vocations. So capital V vocations, religious, priest, married. I think we used to say that there was a single vocation, but now I'm not sure that we still use that particular term. So we'll leave that, we'll bracket that and put that aside. But so your personal vocation obviously is based around the idea that the knowledge that God created you as an absolutely unique and unrepeatable human person. So it's what God wants to do with your life, right? And not the one time, this is how I want to live my life for me sort of decision. But How do you help someone work through how to choose those small V vocations, those personal vocations, in terms of their work or their avocations, those kind of things? Do you work with people with those, or are you really or even within your work preparing young men for the priesthood, are you also talking about small V vocation along with the big V vocation?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's both, right? And like ways in which I can help them navigate small V is going to only provide a good bedrock and foundation for the large V sort of discernment.
Right.
Any vocation is about a journey of discipleship, and it's about acknowledging that this is like a lifelong journey with Christ, and how are we called to sort of participate in that journey? I think we don't have to reinvent the wheel. I think the charismatic preaching that we see in Scripture is very, very important for us to reconsider. Like, it begins from a place of acknowledging our sinfulness and our need for repentance. It's like if we think of Peter and his exhortation to the people, right? He first acknowledges what they did, right? And then here are the prophets who are sent, and you cast them out. And he even sent his only son, and you put him to death. But now I speak this word to you of the Messiah who has come. So I think so often we kind of skip that first part, but it's Peter's encounter with Jesus that he prostrates and says, "Depart from me, Lord, for I'm a sinful man." So I think like in that first step, I can speak to anyone about anything, not just as a priest, but also as a sinner, right? As a fellow penitent. I can speak to that reality. I gave a talk last night at a group, there's 5-6 guys had me over for dinner. They're all dating. And so I'm not trying to convince them to be priests.
Right.
I just gave them a talk on virtue. Right. And so those things, guys are looking for how to develop, men and women, but guys, men and women are looking to develop these principal strengths in their life to help to grow in how they can identify the Lord, his movement, his invitation, when they need to rest, when they need to be proactive. And so a lot of those things are just like general, like priestcraft, right? Like I'm just like being a spiritual father I don't feel like I'm doing it as a vocation director. And then those things lead to real big V conversations then with people because they know me, they trust me, they see me.
Okay. So I want to ask a couple of what I think are harder questions now. Can somebody choose the wrong vocation?
So yeah, I mean, I think that's a good question. I think when it comes to the supernatural vocations, I don't think you can say it was the wrong thing, or that isn't to say like, I don't think you could be ordained and it's not the will of the Lord, because his successor or the successors of the apostles stand and lay hands on you. And that's how you know you've been called. Like until that moment, every seminarian will say, God willing, I'll be ordained in May, God willing, God willing, God willing. Well, sometimes we meet priests, we're like, I can't believe that guy got ordained, right?
Yeah.
And I think like that real human element draws into clear focus what the psalmist tells us. The Lord's ways are not our ways. His thoughts are not our thoughts. And often how the Lord works through the human faculties of his priests can be disconcerting, right? But I think if a man or a woman has been consecrated, has made a vow or has made a promise and has been sort of ordered in this way in their vocation, I don't think you could say that that's a mistake. And I'd say in a similar fashion too, even pursuing the natural sort of vocations of marriage, like the Lord sort of like inviting us into that. His providence overcomes all things. And so I think that language like mistake, like a good or bad, I think I usually stay away from.
Okay. And can you lose a vocation once you have it?
Well, a vocation's a call, right? You can lose sight, so to speak, of the call. You can lose your capacity to hear the voice of the shepherd. And so like, that's why we have to take so assiduously, like our care for our sacramental life, our care for communion with the Lord. I mean, I go to confession like once a week. Like it's, we need to be in an environment in which we stay in a state of grace and we stay in communion with God. And so it's always the same thing. When you hear about a priest leaving, what do you always hear, Mary? He stopped praying his breviary. He stopped praying mass. He stopped praying his holy hour. He cut off his friends. He doesn't have a spiritual director. And you're like, wow, shocking. It's like, okay. And it's not to say that if I do all those things, I won't have a vocation crisis, but it's a big, foundation in terms of fidelity to our call.
Right. It's that daily, that daily yes that you have to, the daily small yes to all the other things of the big yes. But it's your website for St. Francis de Sales Seminary, which, as you pointed out, is the major seminary for all the dioceses in the state of Wisconsin, and then a couple of additional dioceses in neighboring states. It's very interesting to look through the videos of your seminarians with them discussing how they came to know their vocations. And I found that fascinating. Is there something specific that ties all of those men's stories together?
I'll kind of answer by sharing a little bit of what I do uh, every day, in the sense of I run our discernment house. So we have a house of discernment that's existed for 11 and a half years. And what it is predicated on is if a man has community and if a man has consistency in his prayer, he will be able to hear the Lord's voice. I think often what will happen is I'll make the distinction with candidates. And by the way, I meet with a number of women as well and help work with them in their vocation. So there's a similarity here. There's a difference between being open to the Lord and being open to priesthood and discerning the priesthood. The ones who actually begin the act of discernment, they're the ones who have community and they're the ones who have consistency in their prayer. I say to the men, if you're ready for formation, enter seminary. This is not a house of formation. This is not a spirituality year. We got a couple guys with us. One of them is like an accountant. We had today 6 a.m. holy hour, 7 a.m. mass. They have breakfast. He leaves for work. He comes home. If he wants to hang out, he can hang out. If he wants to be part of the community, he can. But that expectation in the house is you're not dating and you're there for prayer in the morning. If you do those two things, that's going to get a man, to sort of move into the next step. So when I think about all the seminarians and how they were called, they found community and they had consistent prayer. Those two things really have to be in place.
Okay. And you mentioned that you do some vocation work with young women as well.
Yeah.
So certain communities, the Sisters of Life, the Nashville Dominicans, Ann Arbor's, the community your sister joined, they're expanding pretty rapidly. And do you think that there's a particular characteristic or reason there that you can point to?
Sure. I say this with a lot of love in my heart. I grew up right next to the mother house for the School Sisters of Notre Dame. Our parish is right next to them. In fact, my plot where I'll be buried is in their cemetery. I got that last year, right? So I have a great love for them. But I think we look at their order and any other number of orders. There was this movement away from, I think, a real common life, a common apostolate, a common sort of like horarium. People look at it and they make like kind of just the distinction, like, oh, the habited orders versus the non-habited orders, right? But I think what the habited order or the habited sister is indicative of is a unified sort of rule of life and community that's important. I think often a lot of these religious orders, they're living in condos or apartments, or some of them still live in the convent. They all have any number of different ministries. Their prayer together is maybe just once a day. My sister has 2 holy hours a day with all the sisters. They pray the hours of the liturgy, the hours together. They have mass to get together daily. They have recreation daily. They have a common life, a common apostolate. Like that common purpose, goal, and mission is so important. I was just out at the postulant's house a few days ago in New York City with the Sisters of Life. It's the same thing that I meet with them. I'm like, they're all different and yet they're all the same. And one of the things I noted is like their culture is so different than the handmaids. Like the handmaids are very charmingly Midwestern, and I love them for it, right? But the handmaids are not like the Dominicans in Ann Arbor. They're very different, like a very different feel. My sister, they're walking barefoot around the house, and everyone basically sounds like they're from northern Minnesota. And so,
right. It's interesting you bring up the issue of the habit. I have a very, very dear friend who is a religious sister. She belongs to a community that has origins in France.
Sure.
And the women there, in order so that they could go out unaccompanied by men, they dressed as the widows of the day. And so that is the charism of their order. So she dresses, like probably an older widow would dress.
Sure.
But so they never had a particular religious habit.
Sure.
And she gets very hurt when this comes up, that it's only because of the habit, because, again, their charism was to make themselves accessible to poor people in the rural South, and where habits would actually be a detriment to their evangelization. That being said, I can tell you, one of my friends who joined the Nashvilles was telling me, like, I didn't want to give up a husband and children to wear a pantsuit and live in an apartment with one other person. Like, she said that just to me seems so depressing.
Yeah.
So again, you don't want to, it doesn't all come down to the clothing, but there is something to it, I think.
Yeah, it's a sign. It's like people see a priest in a cassock and they think one thing or a number of things, good or bad, right? Depending on where they're at. It is a sign that sort of communicates something to them.
Right.
And so I think that's the sign that people are seeing. They see the habit and they can trust that it means some of these other things are in place. the common life, the common prayer, the common discipline.
Just as we're wrapping things up here, Father, what's your biggest reason for hope in this insane world that we're living in now that also, I feel like every time I turn on the news, it's another dumpster fire, underway. What is the personal way in which you keep your hope alive, and how do you offer that hope to other people?
Yeah, I mean, I think I would encourage people to become students of history, especially church history. To say that it's been worse before, it's not like an understatement.
It's always been a dumpster fire.
There's always
just didn't know about it.
Yeah, we don't have a pope posthumely exhuming his successor and holding a mock trial and casting his body into the river.
There's
that happened. There's that. That's not great.
Right.
But also we can't be Pollyannish and be like, I mean, I really fundamentally believe we have to continue to make that act of faith and to trust that God is in control and that we are participants in his work of salvation. And so we have to live our lives robustly. We have to make acts of penance, and we have to make sacrifice for the salvation and sanctification of our brethren. But to keep those things sort of in mind, I think I'm most encouraged by the younger generations, because if you're doing it, you're choosing it. I remember when I was in Iceland for a couple of weeks once, I had the opportunity to help out there with some priests. And yeah, I mean, if you're in Iceland, which is very secular, you're not like going to mass because it's cool. People go to mass and I have to be socially accepted. It's like, if you're going to mass, you're going because you believe in our Savior. And so I think that's where you see young people today. If you're 18 years old and you're going to mass on Sunday, it's like you're making that active choice. And so I think it's kind of like that's been prophesied. We'll be a smaller church, but a more robust and zealous church. And the Lord can certainly work with that. Well,
as we're closing, I want to say one of the things I was most impressed with, to go back to your wonderful seminary dinner that was held in October. My first takeaway, I was trying to put my finger on it, and I thought, that whole event, it was very masculine. And I was watching an interview with your rector where he was talking about how he said, I have good men here, and I'm helping them to become men.
Yes.
And I thought that's a very different way that priesthood has been described to me. And I think one of the fruits of that is that you all have quite the championship basketball team, don't you?
We do.
And I did not know there was a traveling trophy. Can you explain that to our listeners?
Yeah, so Mundelein in Illinois has always had this basketball tournament. And then
the Running Reverends,
Or COVID upended it, and so everyone was kind of coming out of COVID in their own way, and so we hosted a small tournament one year, and then got more teams invited. And so last 3 or 4 years we've had this tournament with about 12 or 13 seminaries, about 200 seminarians come, and it's pretty competitive basketball. And we have got guys who played college basketball in their own way before entering seminary. And so we, in overtime, beat St. Paul Seminary. And so I'm sure they're hungry to sort of come back and win that.
They want to get it, yeah.
But I think that's the thing people need to see. I think I talked to people, and he said, Father, I wake up, I go to work, I come home. He said, all of my friends, they're using drugs. They're addicted to all these horrible things. They're so isolated. They're so mean. They're drifting. He's like, I meet the priests and seminarians in Milwaukee, and you are the most joyful and purposeful and driven. And I think just feeling like that dynamism. So the basketball tournament is just an example of it. But the guys really are living a purpose-driven life. And part of that just flows from their that self-identity and self-possession and its desire for self-mastery. And a huge component of that is just a masculine heart. And to be able to conform themselves to that. And I think the world is so quick to say that masculinity is toxic, but it's a great gift. And the church needs strong masculine men, both as priests, but also as husbands and fathers.
Well, Father John LoCoco, thank you so much for joining us for the EDIFY podcast today. It's been a pleasure speaking with you, and God bless you with all the wonderful work you're doing for Vocations.
Thank you so much, and God bless you.
Thank you for listening. To make it easier for you to listen to future EDIFY podcast episodes, please make sure you subscribe over at Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts. Thank you.